are just certain moments in life where you see something or someone and you instantly know you need to experience it. I remember meeting my present-day fiance when I was 14. I was a freshman in high school. I'm pretty sure we met for the first time in the lunchroom. And then we ended up having a couple of classes together over the years and, well, we didn't get engaged until almost 20 years later, so we didn't have one of those instant spark moments. But the first time I saw this guitar, I knew I had to try it. This is the PRS Chleo Herman Li signature guitar. Unlike Herman Li, I'm not a shred metal guitarist. I play blues, jazz, fusion legato, rock, fingerstyle, basically everything except for shred metal. But Herman Li himself said this:
when I was designing this pickup and this guitar, I really wanted to be a super versatile instrument that can play really all kinds of stuff, from metal all the way to soft, rock, jazz.
And he also said this. So in today's video, we're going to cover Chleo in extreme detail, and for fun, I'll throw in a couple of my pathetic attempts at shred metal. Oh, and PRS let me borrow this guitar, but I don't get to keep it, and they didn't pay me. But this video is sponsored by Clarity Guitar Studio, the best place for average adults to affordably learn guitar online with a clear structure and a supportive community. Check the first link below to start your free trial, but more on this topic later. Starting from the headstock, we have the familiar PRS shape with Paul Reed Smith written in abalone cursive, which is both over the top and beautiful in the best way possible. I don't often dwell on tuners, but I really like the PRS locking design. They're open back, which saves a little bit of weight and also exposes the gear, which is functional and cool looking. And the locking mechanism sits on top rather than behind the headstock, which means when you thread the string through the post and clamp it down, you barely have to move your hand. There's no awkward wrist twist or fumbling behind the headstock. It makes string changes maybe 2% faster, which doesn't really matter, but this is a $7,000 guitar, so yeah, it does matter. PRS also loves these natural wood headstocks, and it works here. The warm wood of the headstock against the dark ebony fretboard frames the neck beautifully and makes the neon pink body pop even louder. As much as I like this combo, I think there was a missed opportunity here. A matching pink headstock would have really pushed this whole thing into full 80s territory, loud, unified, maybe even a little ridiculous, especially when you consider all of the gold hardware. And I mean that in the best way possible. This guitar already flirts with excess, so let's just go full send. Pink body, abalone dragons, pink headstock, gold hardware. Let's just go crazy with it. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with me. And finally, if you look closely, you'll see that the truss rod cover carries the Chleo logo and a dotted typeface that looks straight out of an 8-bit video game. And that's fitting because Dragon Force's music has always carried that frantic, high-speed video game energy. But we conclude the headstock hardware tour with the locking nut. So yes, we have locking tuners and a locking nut. And that's exactly how it should be. Bonnie decided she needed to be part of the video, so yeah. Too many companies release performance guitars which are over $1,000 and they throw on a locking nut but then cheap out for standard tuners. That completely misunderstands the point. Locking tuners don't keep you in tune. They make string changes faster. Insert the string, you clamp it down, tune, and you're done. There's no luthier's knot, no wrapping rituals. Now you'll always find contrarians online that swear they can restring just as quickly without locking tuners. That's simply not true. At best, you save a few seconds per string. You may not care about those seconds, and that's fine. You may also dislike locking tuners for whatever the reason, and that's your God-given right. But you can't deny that they're definitely faster. So the locking tuners make string changes faster, and the locking nut keeps tuning stable under tremolo abuse. Two different jobs, two different tools, and on guitars like this, both belong. And as we make our way to the neck, there is even more to discuss. First, the basics. Maple neck, ebony fretboard, 24 jumbo nickel frets. Now, look, fret material is one of those things that always sparks debate, but the truth is it's more personal preference than anything else. Nickel has a slightly different feel and is a bit more resistance when you bend or do vibrato, and some players actually prefer that. In fact, someone like Herman Lee, who has a very aggressive bending style, stainless steel may not be ideal for him. So stainless steel versus nickel, this isn't like the locking tuner debate. One is not universally better than the other. I think most of us watching would probably prefer stainless steel. I know I certainly would. But let's be honest, if you can afford a $7,000 guitar, you can probably afford a refret down the line. But now let's be more honest. There are only 200 of these guitars that are ever going to be made, and I don't think anyone buying one of these is going to wear down these frets in the first place. Let's not waste time discussing the fit and finish. It's a PRS guitar. The fretwork, the leveling, the fret ends, it's all obviously perfect. It's perfect on their $1,000 guitars, so of course it's going to be perfect on the $7,000 guitar. What's more interesting is that PRS developed a completely new neck shape for this instrument, and it's unlike anything else in their lineup. It's definitely thinner than their other offerings, but it's not Ibanez Wizard thin. The back does feel pretty flat, but there is a bit of shoulder, so to my hands it feels like a very thin D. And although I usually gravitate towards chunky necks, I found this to be surprisingly comfortable. And that's because neck comfort isn't just about thickness. Radius and nut width plays huge roles too, and both of those specs stand out here. So Chleo has a nut width of 44 millimeters, which is pretty wide for an electric guitar. Vintage guitars often have a 42 millimeter nut width, and modern electric guitars usually have 43. In fact, 44 millimeters is more common on acoustic guitars designed for fingerstyle playing, where that added space between the strings helps with accuracy and overall cleanliness. But it also works really well on electric guitar, especially if you have larger hands like I do. And the final spec that ties this neck together is the very flat 20-inch radius. To put this into perspective, quick reminder, the lower the number, the more round it is. 9.5 inches is considered to be fairly round for a guitar, 12 is considered somewhat flat and modern, 16 is reserved for only a handful of guitars, and many people who try a 16-inch radius notice immediately how different it feels. And then we have 20 inches. And there's only a handful of mass-produced guitars that even have a radius this flat. Strandberg's, the PRS Mark Holcomb signature model, and that's basically it. But there's a big misconception about fretboard radius, so let's really discuss this. So the first question is, does radius matter, and if so, why? The guitar belongs to the chordophone family, which comprises stringed instruments. Most European chordophones are primarily bowed, for example, the violin, the viola, and the cello. Bowed instruments require a radius because without that curve, the bow can't isolate a single string. You would hit 2 or 3 at once. So the radius literally makes bowed chordophones playable. If you've ever experimented with bowing a standard guitar, you'll know it's practically impossible to do it cleanly. And that's partly because even an old school 7.5-inch radius is just not enough for a bowed instrument. But of course, the guitar isn't bowed. It's a plucked chordophone like the pipa, the vina, and even the harp. The electric guitar's closest ancestor is the 19th century Spanish guitar, which traditionally has a completely flat fretboard. So for centuries, classical players have played the most complex chord-heavy virtuosic music imaginable on a flat board. And that's worth remembering. So where did the radius on the electric guitar even come from? Early electrics like Fenders often had a 7.25-inch radius. Later that became 9.5, and the logic seemed intuitive. If you just hold up your hand and let it relax, you'll see there's a natural curve in both the hand and the fingers. In fact, making your hand straight and flat is actually an act of extension. It takes muscular effort. So a curved board is supposed to match the hand's resting posture, making chord shapes easier. In fact, some modern builders try to have it both ways by using a compound radius. For example, on this guitar down by the open strings, the radius is only 10 inches, so it's supposed to be more comfortable for playing chords like you would usually do down here. And then as you move up the neck, the radius actually gets flatter until around here where it's around 15. The idea being that 15 is nice and flat for when you're doing all of your single note lines and shredding like you generally do in this region of the neck. It's a clever design and it does work for some players, but in my experience, it still reinforces a misconception that round equals better for chords and flat equals better for leads. So although the idea that a radius helps with chords makes sense on the surface, when we look back at nylon string tradition, the evidence doesn't quite add up. Spanish guitarists have been playing virtuosic, chord-heavy music on flatboards for more than 200 years without complaint. If a radius truly made chords easier, I suspect they would have discovered and adopted it long before Fender came along. I adopted flatter radii several years ago, and most of my favorite instruments now have a 20-inch radius. And keep in mind, I play a lot of chords. I find that flatter radii tend to make everything more straightforward, fast single note lines, wide chords, difficult stretches, everything just feels better to me personally. Now to be clear, personal history always matters. In fact, it might matter more than everything else. So if you've only ever played a 9.5 or 10-inch radius, 20 is going to feel alien at first. But I would encourage anyone to live with it for a few months. My hunch is that you'll discover, as I have, that flatter really is better across styles, across techniques, and across the entire range of the neck. But interestingly enough, when you combine this unique, fairly thin neck shape, the ultra flat fretboard, and the wider nut width, this guitar actually starts to feel a lot like a classical guitar, and that makes it fantastic for fingerstyle playing. Many high-end PRS models are finished in nitrocellulose, but here we just get satin, and it's not just on the neck, it's carried through the entire body, and I love the way it feels. The whole guitar just feels immediately smooth, with none of the sticky break-in period you sometimes get with gloss. Honestly, I wish more PRS guitars took this approach. The fretboard edges are also beautifully rolled, which together with the satin finish, results in a neck that is not just smooth, but honestly velvety. Now this guitar of course has a lot of beautiful features, but my absolute favorite are the dragon inlays. Not only are these my favorite PRS inlays, but I think they might be my favorite inlays of all time. The abalone pops especially well against this dark ebony fretboard. But I do have one frustration with them. The moment I realized that there were dragons on this fretboard, I felt a sense of responsibility. A guitar of this stature, and frankly a review of this length, deserves more than a passing mention of, oh look, dragons. No, this feature deserves proper scholarly treatment, a rigorous study of the origin, the lineage, the taxonomy of each individual dragon inlay. Because naturally, we want to know not just what dragons these were, but also from whence each draconic lineage descended and into which ancient mythological taxonomy they properly belong. Are these Asian dragons descended from the imperial traditions of China and Japan? Celtic dragons entwined in knotwork mythology? Or perhaps something more obscure like the Norse worms? Or perhaps even apocryphal species lost to history? And so like any diligent academic, I began my research. And this is where the issues began. The first resource, presented rather ambitiously under the title Dragonology, was in fact nothing more than a children's book. It even has little textured illustrations meant for preschool classrooms, not doctoral level dragon studies. Hardly the scholarly depth I was looking for. Our second volume, Dragons in Natural History, was marginally better, and it even contained a few surprisingly detailed entries covering not only origin myths, but even the finer points of dragon training. Still, the material wasn't truly taxonomic as I had hoped, but I did finally uncover a text of high merit, a Dracopedic field guide that honestly rivals scientific classics such as Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Even so, the issues weren't truly resolved. Using this book, I was able to vaguely classify a few of the inlays. For example, inlay 12 is quite clearly an Asian dragon, long, serpentine, cloud-dwelling, often depicted with an extended tongue and prominent limbs instead of wings. However, I still can't tell if this is Draco-Montanian from Tibet or Draco-Orientalis Magnus from China. There just isn't enough detail in the inlay to identify it. And I must confess that my best analysis of fret 7 is simply Draco Amphitheater. But this subspecies is found across the entire world, and based on the inlay, I cannot ascertain an exact origin. And unfortunately, the other inlays are even more obscure, and I could not identify them with any degree of academic confidence. I'm not sure what resources PRS consulted when designing these inlays, but I have a suspicion that this taxonomy may not be entirely accurate. And that's upsetting for a guitar in this price range. Luckily, a lot of care was given to the upper fret access. My test is usually to put my thumb at the base of the neck and to see if I can comfortably reach the highest fret with my pinky or my ring finger. If I put my thumb in the base of the neck, my pinky can easily reach above the neck pickup. So really, upper fret access can't be any better. It's always going to be phenomenal. There's also a substantial distance between the lower horn and the neck, so you won't smash your hand when you're playing in this area. And I know this is made for shredders, but it works equally well even if you're just playing chords. We also have scalloping on the upper frets, so you can really grip the string well when you're doing bending and vibrato. As we move to the body, the first thing you're going to notice is this stunning flame maple top and the unapologetically pink finish. I honestly don't know if I prefer this or the purple version. Purple is my favorite color, but the pink is absolutely striking, and when you pair it with all of this gold hardware, you're making a big statement. But of course, the most important thing is how it feels. And the moment you hold this guitar against your body, it's immediately and almost shockingly comfortable. I know the shape looks alien to some, but it really feels incredibly natural. Of course, there's a very nice carved top which helps with right arm comfort, and there's a substantial belly cut on the back, as well as a series of thoughtful rear carves that make it sit against your body nicely. And really, the more you look at the guitar, the more you realize how meticulous the craftsmanship really is. There's the classic PRS violin carve on the top, which you expect at this level. But there's also a violin carve on the back, something I'm not sure I've seen elsewhere. And as you trace that carve from the edge to the core of the body, you'll find a kind of valley on both sides in this area, and it's just the thinnest strip of wood right over here. It almost feels like pinching the webbing between your thumb and index finger. And as you follow from the rear towards the upper horn, the body gets much thicker, but the transition is so smooth and graceful that it feels organic. I know Herman Lee likes to grab his guitars by the upper horn, and you can tell this was built for that exact reason. It feels right, very intentional. In fact, I'm pretty sure throughout this review I kept holding the guitar like this just because it just feels like that's the way to hold this guitar. And then even around the different electronic components like the battery in the back or the 5-way switch on the front, there is just so much attention to detail and, again, carving. Although it looks stunning, all of this carving has a practical benefit too: weight relief. Remember, this guitar body is absolutely loaded. 3 pickups, a giant battery, locking tremolo, stabilizers. There's a lot of heavy hardware in there. And without careful consideration, this could easily tip into being overbearing from a weight perspective. But instead, it feels perfectly balanced and surprisingly lightweight. On the strap, there's no neck dive, and on your body, it just kind of sits in the perfect position. I remember when I was reviewing the Ormsby RC1. That guitar also had a thin shredding neck with a compact body and a lot of heavy hardware. And that guitar, though very cool, didn't balance perfectly well. It was somehow heavy in the body, and it still also had neck dive. It's definitely a very cool guitar, and I'm happy it exists. But Chleo doesn't have any balance problems whatsoever. In fact, the balance is shockingly good. It definitely looks wild. And yes, it's artistic and dramatic, but it's also extremely functional. Chleo manages to be bold without being a burden. Actually, there is one slight burden, and that's, well, it's the recessed output jack. Now listen, I'm really happy that this design exists the exact way it is. It's another example of craftsmanship, the carving, the attention to detail, and I also think it looks really cool. This is a signature guitar, and the function was clearly designed to please Herman Lee, a man who runs around on stage doing things with his guitar that I wouldn't ever personally do. It makes perfect sense to have this jack so deep into the body. And the function of making sure you don't accidentally pull out your cable, that's perfect here as well. But if you happen to be buying this $7,000 guitar to play as your main guitar in your home studio, well, then you might not love this jack. If you pick up your normal guitar and grab your cable, you probably have a bit of muscle memory and you can just insert the cable pretty effortlessly. We do this probably thousands of times. But you can't really do that with Chleo. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, every time I plug this guitar in, I have to hold it like this and look at the jack and line it up perfectly to lock it in right. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this guitar has active pickups, which means if you leave your cable in the guitar, your battery is being drained. So you can't just plug it in, leave it here on the stand, and pick it up and put it down without worrying. You have to pick it up, insert the cable, and then remove it every time you put your guitar back down. So that means every time you pick Chleo up, there's going to be that awkward amount of time when you have to turn it around and hold it and carefully look inside to line up the cable to properly secure it. Obviously, this is not a concern for Herman Li, and this is his signature guitar. For him and other live performing guitar players, the most important thing is that the show goes on without a hitch. And for that reason, this design is absolutely perfect. I'm just saying, for the bedroom guitarist who is buying a $7,000 guitar to leave out on a stand to pick up and play throughout the day, that design isn't ideal. But I'm still happy it exists because it looks really cool. So the first thing that I noticed about these pickups is that, as you might expect, they are really hot. So let me just give you a quick backstory. When I play through my normal rig, I tend to go for a very clean, sometimes edge of breakup tone. But to get that, I actually run a jumped Marshall with the gain all the way back. And I do that because if I just run a pure clean amp, I often find that the tone is a little bit too thin and there's not enough body. But if I run that Marshall and just turn the gain down, I still get that body of the big Marshall without getting all of the gain for my clean tones. Now, when I play all of my guitars through that rig, they're pretty much clean edge of breakup. With this guitar, it immediately overdrives that setting. So I'm just gonna go to the neck pickup, and as you can hear, it's definitely a bit hotter than I'm used to. And when I go to the bridge pickup, so that immediately, of course, shows me that the pickups are very hot. But if you don't add a lot of gain to it, you can still get that classic rock rhythm sound if that's what you want. That whole, that whole thing if that's your vibe. So the first thing that I want to do is just see what the full humbuckers sound like full, and then very closely compare it to what it sounds like split, so we can see if there's a decent split tone. Is it making a difference here? So let's check that out first. Here is the full neck. And now let's check the bridge. So there's definitely a big difference between the full humbucker tone and the split tone. But the thing that I find most interesting about these Fishman Fluence pickups is that with a normal humbucker, when you split it, it can sound good, but it often sounds like a single coil version of the same pickup, which makes sense. But with the Fishman Fluence pickups, I feel that the full humbucker tone versus the split tones feel like totally different pickups. I'm not sure if that's only me. Let me know in the comments below if you kind of agree with that assessment. So although Herman Li is of course a metal guitar player, this guitar actually has a huge variety of split coil tones. So let's see if we can get kind of that funky, quacky type sound. If you have none of the push-pulls engaged, so just a normal setup, and then you go to position 4, we're going to get a single coil from the neck plus the middle pickup. So kind of like that classic Strat kind of a thing. And it sounds like this. So same kind of a sound now, but where we have the bridge pickup split plus the middle pickup. So that rear stratty kind of a thing. So I wouldn't say buy this instead of a Strat if you want a Strat tone, but you can kind of get some of that quacky sound. We'll just try the position 3, which is just the middle pickup. Let's see if that's a bit more quacky maybe. I must confess, I'm very nervous about getting my pick hitting any of this paint. So I'm trying to play in a way that's not going to potentially hit the guitar. So apologies for my less than stellar funky playing today. I would still say that even just the middle pickup by itself, still pretty hot. And now we have a few other very unique tones. So if we stay in this position right here, which is usually just a single coil pickup in the middle, and we engage the push-pull, now we're going to have both of the humbucker pickups. When we just had the single coil pickup versus both humbuckers combined, huge difference in tone and output, but also, again, a nice classic rock kind of a sound, at least with these amp settings. So if we engage the push-pull pot on position 4, we're now going to have the outer single coil from the neck, so the single coil closest to the neck itself, and the outer coil from the bridge, so the single coil closest to the bridge. This is kind of like a telly type sound. So far, I think that is the most convincing of the split tones. And now if we move to position 2 with the push-pull up, we're going to have the inner coils. So the coil from the neck that's closest to the middle pickup, and the coil from the bridge that's closest to the middle pickup as well. Actually, that sounds very convincing as well. Let's go back to the other sound. So to my ears, the traditional Strat tone setup is actually a bit hotter than the other configuration. So listen to that one more time. We'll do the traditional Strat E sound, and then we'll go to the other version of it for this guitar. Yeah, the second version is definitely more convincing. Let's try it now with the position 2. So definitely very, very versatile pickups. And keep in mind, I didn't even engage the other thing from the back. There's just too many tones if I do that, but really nice tones and also very versatile tones, as you can hear. So as you heard, this guitar has a wide variety of tones, which is great for those of us who like different genres. Maybe you like a little bit of metal, a little bit of legato shred, some rock, maybe a little blues, a touch of jazz. Hell, maybe you even like to play some fingerstyle arrangements on occasion. Well, if you're a guitar player like that, it can be super hard to find a versatile guitar for you. And it can also be hard to learn how to play the guitar to begin with. There aren't many places where you can study a little bit of everything while getting consistent support and feedback. But that's why Clarity Guitar Studio exists. It's designed for normal busy adults who want to get better at guitar with a bit of structure and guidance. There's a 7-day free trial, so you can check it out risk-free by clicking the first link below. And our last major feature before we get into the price is the Godot Floyd Rose style tremolo. On its own, this part isn't the most interesting. Godot makes extremely high-end hardware, and this is no exception. It's built to last a lifetime. Yeah, this upper horn really is great for holding the guitar. So when you have the locking nut and the Floyd Rose style bridge, tuning stability is going to be great for your tremolo acrobatics. But the really interesting part is what's happening underneath, the tremolo stabilizer that PRS designed specifically for this guitar. By the way, I know scientifically speaking, this is called a vibrato bridge, not a tremolo bridge. But languages evolve over time, and it's not a perfect science, it's more of an art. Tremolo bridge and vibrato bridge are both acceptable terms, and here's why. Guitarists use the term tremolo bridge as a compound verb, which describes a bridge that actually performs vibrato. In the more scientifically accurate phrase, vibrato bridge, vibrato functions as an adjective that describes the action being performed by the noun bridge. Technically speaking, vibrato in that context is an attributive noun, not an adjective, but anyway. Because of this linguistic history, both vibrato bridge and tremolo bridge have become acceptable terms. So you can say with 100% grammatical accuracy, I use my tremolo bridge to create vibrato. Okay, back to the Chleo and the tremolo stabilizer. The beauty of a fully floating tremolo is that it feels incredibly light, silky, and responsive. The physics are such that the area right above and below the 0 point are on a hair trigger. So with the slightest bit of force, you can manipulate the pitch both up or down. But here's the drawback. If you bend one string, all of the other strings instantly go out of tune. So double stop bends sound sour. And of course, if you break a string mid-song, the entire guitar goes out of tune instantly. And there's no way around this, it's simple physics. Unless you use a tremolo stabilizer. A stabilizer creates a firm stop at the 0 point of the tremolo. That means when you bend a string, the bridge doesn't move, and the other strings stay perfectly in tune. And if you break a string, the system stays locked in place, so the rest of the guitar remains mostly in tune most of the time. Some consider this the perfect middle ground between a fully floating bridge and a fixed bridge. But remember, this is still physics and not magic. And stabilizers come with a trade-off. The bridge feels noticeably stiffer, and as you dive down and then release, you feel a very noticeable click as it gets back to the stop point. And the same applies when you pull up and then release. So I'm going to put the microphone next to the bridge so that you can hear exactly what I mean about how it kind of clicks in and out of place. And that whole thing of having that stop point is what allows you to palm mute very heavily without worrying about it. It allows you to break a string and not have to worry about it. It allows you to do double stop bends and all of that great stuff. But again, there's always a trade-off with these different vibrato systems. So you definitely lose that silky responsiveness right around the 0 point of the bridge. And flutters are also basically gone. Now for a guitar player like Herman Lee and maybe you, that's perfect. His right hand technique is extremely aggressive, so he can palm mute super hard without concern. And if you're creating vibrato by lifting the guitar from the whammy bar itself, that's more than enough force to manipulate the bridge. So the stabilizers allow him to push the system to the extreme without sacrificing stability. But if you're a player that's more like me, it's not the best thing. I have a very light touch with my right hand, and I like to use the vibrato in a very delicate way, hovering right above and below the 0 point. For that lighter, more subtle style, stabilizers don't work well. You could also just remove the stabilizers and run Chleo like a traditional Floyd Rose. PRS gives us that option as well. But now let's talk about the price, because this guitar costs around $7,000. And when a guitar like this shows up, something this beautiful, this unique, some may say this alien, but also this expensive, the first topic is usually going to be price. I would never pay more than $207 for any guitar. Jimi Hendrix didn't need a $7,000 guitar. And guess what? I also would never buy this guitar. But let's forget about supply and demand. Let's forget about the fact that these are sold out anyway, so clearly the price is not too much. Forget all of that. Here's the truth I was alluding to earlier. Making a new, unique, beautiful piece of art, be it an album, a painting, or a guitar, this is not an economical use of time or money. Art is not efficient. The best art has to be wasteful, and waste is expensive. Have you ever heard the album Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys? 1966, Brian Wilson demanded the best LA session players. There were an insane number of takes and overdubs. It took 10 months to make, and it cost over $70,000 to produce. To put that into perspective, Rubber Soul by the Beatles came out just a year earlier in 1965. It had a ton of hits, it was recorded in about 4 weeks, and it cost around $18,000. So Brian Wilson was spending more than 3 times as much money and taking 10 times as long to make an album that initially confused the label and didn't sell as well as previous Beach Boy records. But today, it's one of the most celebrated albums of all time. And some of the sounds from that record completely changed popular music forever. Imagine if Brian Wilson said, this is too expensive. Have you ever seen the Cologne Cathedral in Germany? It's one of the most stunning buildings on the planet. Construction began in the year 1248, and it wasn't finished until 1880. That's more than 600 years. Generations of architects, builders, artists, they all worked on it knowing full well they would never live to see it completed. Imagine if the very first architect had said, this is too expensive. I can build a different dwelling that's equally hospitable for 1/1,000,000th of the price. I'll say it again. I would never buy and keep this guitar. It's not my preferred spec, and I can't afford it. But that's not the point. I'm happy someone had the vision to create it, and honestly, I feel honored to just hold it. The truth is, I also have no desire to buy a Lamborghini. Even if I was a millionaire, I probably still wouldn't choose to buy one. But I would definitely rent one if I was on vacation. Damn, that would be fun. By the way, we also talk gear at Clarity Guitar Studio because there's no reason you can't enjoy gear and get better at the guitar at the same time. Free trial with the first link below. And if you liked any of the music or licks played in this video, you can download the tab for free, also linked below.